In this video, I will teach you about the Maroczy bind, which is the position you can see right now. And this can appear if you play the Sicilian accelerated dragon, but even if you play other Sicilian variants, you can get this position. And it's important that you know what to do in this position, because if you have never seen this, it might be a bit difficult to play. So I particularly got here because of playing the Sicilian accelerated dragon, so e4, pawn to c5, knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, we capture this, and then we play pawn to g6, of course, because we want to put the bishop here in the Sicilian dragon style. And if you don't know what to do in this position, I actually have a video on this as well. But here we are in particular going to analyze what if white plays pawn to c4, which leads to the Maroczy bind. And this is really favored by grandmasters, so if you give a grandmaster this position and you tell them that they are white, most of the time they will choose to play pawn to c4. If you play this online, and your opponent has this position, actually only 10% of games are this move, pawn to c4. But still, it's an interesting move because especially as you face stronger players, you will see this more often. So what are we going to do here as black? Well, the beginning, of course, is a bit simple still. We played pawn to g6 because we want to develop our bishop, so we can just go ahead and do so. You can play other moves as well, but here you can just keep things pretty simple and develop your bishop. And if we take a look at this position, you will realize that white actually has quite a strong center, because they have both these e4 and c4 pawns, which means they have basically two pawns in the center of the board right now, and we don't have a single one. And white especially has a lot of control over those light squares. You can see all of these light squares are in white's control, and even in the future they are going to strengthen their grip here on the light squares as well. So for black, we will have to try and fight back by using the dark squares. That's the best approach here. And in particular, that's going to be the e5 and also the c5 square. We can potentially put some of our pieces there. So that is one important thing to keep in mind. It's white to move here. You might always be thinking, well, why would white not just capture your knight? But that's never really a good plan, because, for example, here we can recapture with the pawn, and all of a sudden you can see that, well, basically, first of all, we are challenging white's control of these light squares. So that already gives us a little bit of a counter to what white is trying to set up. Also, they just removed an active knight in the center of the board for no reason. They helped us get the pawn closer. And you could continue like this, for example, pawn to d6, bishop to e2, knight to f6, castles, castles. And yeah, this position has way less strength for white, just because we now are also controlling all of these squares. The knight is also helping, and yeah, white kind of gave away their edge. Not that it's a super big difference, but they are kind of giving away their advantage. So most of the time they will play bishop to e3 just so they can defend this in case we ever try to take, which we are not going to do right now, but if we ever take, they can always recapture with the bishop. So we look at this from the black side, and of course we still want to develop the knight and castle, and you always have to think, can I put my knight here safely? Because you always have to be careful that you don't suddenly get hit with a move like pawn to e5. For example, in the variation where we take this, now I have to make a move for white, for example this. Sometimes you can get hit with this pawn to e5, and then it can be a little bit annoying. So you always have to be careful you don't run into that, but here we don't have any worries because our knight is still protecting this square. White still has to develop. They have a couple of options. Most popular is putting the knight on c3, and of course you can still see the theme of this opening. As I have already said, it's light square domination from the white side, so that knight also helps doing that. We as black want to continue with the plan, so you can just castle here. Other moves of course are also possible. d6 is usually also a very good move, but it's like I have said, they can't push e5 right now, so we don't have to worry really about this. You can always play it if you want, but it doesn't make too much of a difference. So we are going to castle. White wants to do the same, so they will develop the bishop. Usually you won't see the bishop to d3 too often, because sometimes if they play this, you can try to go for some tricks, because the queen has actually been blocked and is no longer defending the knight. So in some variations, just imagine if you can play d6, knight here, maybe take the bishop, and then all of a sudden this could become a weakness as well. So most of the time you will see bishop to e2 in those positions. And now for black really comes the time that we have to start thinking about our middle game plan, and that is the most important part of this video, the middle game plan for black. Because if you look at this, white has a pretty decent position. White has basically 3 or even 4 pieces that are, well, actually centralized. They have the pawns here, and black is still kind of stuck here on the first 3 ranks, and we didn't achieve much yet. So black will really have to try and make a comeback here, because otherwise you are just going to be crushed by your opponent. So this is not a really tactical position, but more so a really strategic position, where you have to think about long-term consequences of your moves. So right now, what we would love to do, of course, is to develop this bishop. This bishop is still stuck. To do this, we would have to move the d pawn, so pawn to d6 is always a good move here, because, well, first of all, it helps with the simple plan of controlling e5 and c5, and also this frees up our bishop. In some variations, you can jump in with the knight, maybe trade it for the bishop. Right here, of course, it won't work, but sometimes players will move their queen out somewhere, or they will put the bishop here, and then you can also go for that. White always has the move pawn to f3, which they can play now, they can play it later. Usually the top grandmasters wait a pretty long time before they play this. This just helps, of course, for them to strengthen their center and also stop the knight jump potentially. But they have to be willing to play this. If you play some lower rated players, I think many of them also won't play this move. White can just castle, it's fine. White is just continuing, white still has a good position. And still for black, we are kind of struggling to find a lot of good moves. If we look at this, we want to develop the bishop, but yeah, none of these squares are an option. All of them are light squares, and all of them are controlled by white as well. So we are just going to put the bishop on d7, because now it's supporting the knight. If this trade ever happens, you can actually take with your bishop, so that's also fine. And if it doesn't happen, for example, if they play queen to d2, which is very popular, we can always move the knight, and then we can put the bishop on c6 later. This idea from white with the queen d2 and the bishop on e3 is very common against the Sicilian dragon. The main plan for white, of course, if I just make a random move, is in many variations to try and put the bishop here. But white also has to be careful, because if they do this too early, they will always run into trouble. For example, takes, and then all of a sudden the knight has disappeared. But of course, they can always capture here. Let's say we take this, and then they can try to play for this move. And now again, if you take, the queen is here, but right now you can see that we would also be capturing this pawn on e4. And that is the entire plan here. We have to defend against this threat, but we want to try and defend against it by creating counter threats and creating counter attacks. And that is why also this bishop here on d7 is a pretty good move, because if they take, we at least have the counter threat here. Right now they can't play it, because we would be able to capture with the knight. So yeah, we are always trying to stop this plan, even if they play it earlier or a bit later. We always want to try and stop this plan with counter tactics. Sometimes you can also go for rook to e8. Again, this is currently not possible, of course, because of this exchange as well. Okay, so we have to make a move for black, and there are multiple good moves. But at this point, usually, if white didn't capture your knight, one of the best ideas is to just capture their knight, because of course, well, either the bishop or the queen will have to move, and that means they will have to move one of those pieces twice, and also one of those pieces will be removed from this diagonal. Most likely they won't be capturing with the queen, because of course you can play something like knight to g4, have a discovered attack on the queen, they move back, we can eliminate the bishop, get something like this, and of course this is pretty nice to play from the black side. So most of the time they will capture here with the bishop, and that also removed the potential threat that we were going to have here with white really going after our king and trying to go for checkmates. Again, black to move, what are we going to do? Well, we are just going to continue with the plan. We are going to play the bishop to c6, as we have said before, because this also creates some extra pressure. And most of the time, as f pawn f2, f3 hasn't been played yet, white will play it here, of course, to protect the center as well. Now, again, we look at this from the black side, and you can see that we have made some progress, right? We have been able to put some more pressure on these two squares with our pawn. We were also kind of challenging the light squares now with the bishop, so that if this knight ever tries to jump in, at least we can exchange with the bishop. We were also trying to go for tricks, maybe play this, but white didn't allow us to do it. But still, we have to think about a new plan. And one of the best plans here for black is to try and move the knight and eventually also jump into the c5 square, because this is a square that's in our control. even if we are allowing this, it's not really a problem. But in general, I would recommend to wait one more move and play pawn to a5 first, which is also a very popular move, because by doing this, we just gain a little bit more space on the queen side. We are also controlling the b4 square, so pushing this pawn to b4, trying to kick away the knight, will be quite difficult for white to play. And we're also kind of waiting, just playing wait and see and checking out what white is going to do before we make our move. And for white, suddenly it's also not so clear anymore what the best approach is. Most popular is pawn to b3. You might also see them moving over a rook, maybe rook f to d1. But yeah, none of the moves from white really have a big impact at this point because we were able to counter all of their plans. Pawn to b3 is also very popular just because, of course, this structure is very solid and you can just simply see the entire plan for white is to go for light square domination. And now really is the time that we can move our knight and we can start thinking about giving it a new home here on c5 where it will be more active. You might think it's strange that we are allowing this bishop trade on the diagonal, but it's actually not much of a problem. We can just trade this and one of these centralized pieces from black has been eliminated, and also this bishop was one of the only pieces for white that was able to also put pressure on the dark squares. And now that this bishop is gone, we can actually put our knight here and we can be pretty safe. Sometimes, yes, you can get this check. You can probably play something like pawn to f6. We are fine and we still have a lot of control over the dark squares. So if white knows what they are doing, they will actually move back the bishop. They don't want to trade it right now. Which I think if you play online, a lot of players are going to trade. But if you play against higher rated players, probably they are going to retreat the bishop because they know that they have to keep this as a defender in case we want to control these squares. So we are of course going to continue with the plan. We will just play our knight to c5. The knight has been activated. Taking this is a really bad move for white, which can sometimes happen. They can sometimes try this. But the thing is, we can simply take back. And now we have some queen standoff. So they might think, okay, I'm going to grab the queen. But we grab this and we actually have the open file. So now we are controlling the open file. Plus, you can also see this diagonal is still in our control. So probably this has to be played. And then we can all of a sudden enter the position, attack this bishop. Maybe the bishop has to go here. This is pretty terrible position. You can already see how white is so very passive. So that is why this would be a big mistake. And actually our knight is safe here on c5, even though it looks like white can capture it. White might continue with something like rook here. Of course, they would like to kick out the knight, maybe with a3, b4, if they are allowed to do so. So we are going to play queen to b6, so we can at least prevent this one more move. If we make a different move, but again, it's a bit hard to find a move. If I just make any other move, white is going to start playing here on the queen side. And they might also do that by putting the knight here on b5 as well. So we are going to put the queen here. White might try to play knight to a4, which is a mistake, and I think this is a very common mistake you will see. They might also play knight here to b5, but again, in some variations you might be able to take, and then suddenly white is defending now to try and keep onto this pawn. But the most interesting variation for sure is what if white plays the knight to a4, because we can actually capture this, which damages the structure. Of course, our queen is now under attack, so we will have to move the queen. But you can suddenly see that the white position, which was very solid a couple of moves ago, has kind of collapsed. So that is why this knight move is not such a good move in this position. Some other popular moves are oftentimes moving the rooks in, trying to control the queen side. And from here on out, it's going to be a really long and strategic battle still. But if you just remember the key ideas that we have talked about up until now, you will already know more than most players about what to do in this particular position. If you want to learn a bit more about the Maroczy bind, you can also check the top pinned comment, which will give you my Lichess study that I use for this video, because there are many more variations in there as well, and you can also try out some moves yourself. That's it for this video. If you enjoyed it, definitely subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!